Hello and welcome back. It is podcast episode 7, which I usually release on Patreon for my patrons. But today, it is such a gorgeous day outside. We've had snow coming down for about something like 18 hours. And there's nothing like snow that makes my heart more delighted and happy. I dearly, dearly love the snow. I would much rather be out in the snow than in any other kind of weather. And so I've thoroughly enjoyed watching the snow all day. I've thoroughly enjoyed playing with my kids in the snow. But I thought that I would also do a podcast out in the snow. And because it's so gorgeous, I have to do a video podcast rather than simply an audio podcast. And for today's topic, I decided that I would do the symbolism of snow in literature because, hey, it's the perfect time for it. And as I said, I usually only release these on Patreon, but I'm also going to go ahead and release at least part of the podcast here on YouTube as well, so that you can enjoy it. And if you like it, you should check out the rest of my podcasts, which are regularly on Patreon. But today, like I said, we're going to talk about the symbolism of snow. So to start with, let's talk about some of the symbols that snow is used for. Now, with any sort of big symbol that seems to show up again and again and again in literature, it's often good to talk about the broad pattern, but also notice that each individual work of literature will usually have its own version of a symbol. So even if a symbol is sort of an archetype and shows up again and again and again in literature, like something like caves or seasons or things like that, each individual work will take and adapt our expectations that are already pre-established for that symbol and then use them specific to that work. So snow sort of functions the same way. But there are maybe 3 major overarching kind of versions of the snow symbol, I guess the snow archetype. The first is associated with the seasonal metaphor. So snow is associated with the winter, and therefore it is often associated with the idea of death. And that's connected with the overarching symbolism of seasons. So usually in that version we have the spring represents birth, the summer represents the sort of prime of life, the fall represents old age and the sort of acceptance of the end of life as well as the sort of fading away, and then winter represents death. And we see that in a lot of different works of literature, and I'll mention some of those in just a few minutes. There's some great versions of all 4 of the seasons being sort of looked at throughout literature, but with that, winter comes associated with death, and snow, of course, connected to the idea of death, can be very sad. And so you have a lot of snow literary symbolism that is thoughtful and reflective and kind of somber, solemn. And as I was looking through and looking for different instances of symbolism of snow, that showed up quite a bit. The second big symbolism of the snow is the symbolism of snow as purity. Because it is so white and because it covers everything over and sort of transforms the environment and makes it look clean, it is often associated with purity and with a purifying kind of influence. And that can be coupled with death, sort of maybe you die to an old lifestyle and then you are transformed and purified. But it can also be simply left alone by itself. And so looking out at the snow always looks clean when it first falls. Of course, it can turn to sludge a few days later, but for the first window, it seems to transform the world. And you no longer see the mud, you no longer see the dirt, everything is covered with white. And there's an intense beauty about that, a purifying aspect about that. And of course, there's a lot of religious symbolism along with that purification. A third kind of symbolism with the snow, besides the seasonal metaphor of death and besides the imagery of purification, is the imagery of quiet reflection. And of course, that can be linked with the others as well. But because snow muffles things, it causes all of the sounds to sort of mute and to decrease in intensity. And so as you look out at this world covered with snow, you tend to hear far less. Even though, at the same time, the foliage is down, all the leaves have fallen off the trees, which seems to open the world up, but it also seems to muffle the world and quiet the world down. And so there is time for peaceful reflection, for introspection, for a kind of pause and quietness. The quietness of the soul, the quietness of the emotions, all of those things can happen in the snow. Which, again, when you couple it with some of the other things, can be a kind of beauty. So, for instance, if you couple the imagery of death with the imagery of quietness, there is a quietness that comes in death because it is beyond the suffering and the pain of life. There's also sort of perhaps maybe a quiet acceptance that can come with death. So if you're undergoing grief and loss, and the snow imagery is perhaps connected with the idea of loss, particularly the idea of the death of a loved one or something like that, perhaps the snow could also quiet one and center one and allow one to experience a kind of peace. So those are some of the big overarching symbols that I see with snow throughout literature. There are others as well. For instance, snow and ice can be associated with a coldness of the spirit, which is, again, a kind of negative symbolism. But snow and ice can be associated with the coldness towards others, a coldness in one's relationships. Of course, at the end of Dante's Inferno, the very deepest part of hell is frozen, because these people are farthest from the love and light of God as possible, and they are the traitors, the treacherous, who have betrayed those closest to them, and in so doing, they've showed themselves to be completely cold-hearted. They are cold and frozen, and we talk about doing violence in cold blood, etc. So snow and ice can be associated with those things. You will also have some great fairy tales of dangerous and terrifying creatures that come from the snow and the ice, particularly the sort of northern fairy tales. A lot of the Norse mythology is associated with winter, and there's a sort of fatalism to winter. But also, Hans Christian Andersen and other fairy tale writers like that who talk about the snow and the ice. The Snow Queen story who sins, where the mirror is shattered and bits and pieces of the shattered mirror, like ice, go into people's heads or into their hearts, and they make them see things from a cold perspective. And we see that a really fascinating fairy tale there. And a lot of other similar fairy tales, again, explore the idea of coldness of heart. And so snow can be associated with that as well.